Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Oh, Mail's here.
That's right, your Owl Post for the week. It's freshly delivered, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and with me this week, as she is every single week, the wonderful Andrea Coffman, who has found her voice.
I was going to say, I wasn't with you last week, like I was all with y'all in spirit, but my voice decided to not show up for you all last week. So I was telling my lovely co-host here before the last recording that I kind of sounded like a cartoon character last week. And while that would have been hilarious, it also may not have been the best use of everyone's time, nor could you have understood what I was saying. So I might have been able to utter a few familiar adult cartoon phrases here and there from like Family Guy, but that's not Harry Potter. So unfortunately, we had to postpone a week so that we could actually understand what I was saying. Otherwise, it would have been 40 minutes of Matt, and as much as I love him, I think he would be tired by the end of that. So
yeah, it's I mean, there's nothing worse than losing your voice. So, and especially for an extended period of time, it just gets really frustrating when you're just like, I need to say something and I can't talk any louder than this. It's like awful. So welcome back. It's good. I'm glad you're feeling better.
So is everybody that I work with, because 90% of my job is just having meetings and leading meetings. And so it was just a lot of nothing is happening here because no one can understand me. So yeah, everyone's happy that things went the way they went.
Well, it's good to be back. We're excited to be here at Chapter 15 as we'll be diving into the Unbreakable Vow. And of course, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're over on Apple Podcasts, make sure you give us a star rating and review so we can read that out and let people know what you think of the show. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get the show too, because that means as soon as the show drops, then you get it. You can find us on Twitter at Join Nerd Party. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Nerd Party. So follow us and like us in those places. And maybe you'd like to send us an email. You can do that at thenerdparty.com/contact. Just choose a show there, and that email comes to Drea and I. So it's really funny in this chapter, Drea, that we are nearing Christmas as this chapter is happening. And there are a large amount of girls who are trying to catch Harry under the mistletoe every time he passes under it, which I can't imagine how awkward that is at school.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that would be so uncomfortable. But I love how he describes the ability to use all his like nighttime sneaking that he's been doing over the last few years to like avoid all the mistletoe. And sneak around all the girls. And it also gives us an opportunity to kind of learn how Ron's doing, because when we left off of the last chapter, he had sort of been snogging Lavender Brown. So we get to kind of see how that progresses here as we start the chapter as well.
And apparently it's just an unending snog fest with them. And so unfortunately, he's back to kind of being like friends with Ron and everything, but it means that anytime he's hanging out with Ron, that Lavender's usually there, and apparently whenever they're not snogging, she thinks it's a waste of time.
Yeah, that I thought this part was really funny because I feel like I've known people like that before. And I for whatever reason, it was so, I was like, I get it. I get exactly what she's trying to show here. Like the mannerisms and the attitude, like I instantly knew what she was trying to say.
Well, and I mean, it's high school, right? And so especially in high school, you kind of knew those people who were like super PDA all the time. And like, that's kind of all that they did. They kind of, I guess, lived in the backseat of their car, so it's like, okay, all right, people, let's grow up. And I think it's funny because, at this point, Harry's just trying to like stay friends with Ron and Hermione, and they have this split right now. And so Ron's just all, well, I mean, Hermione can't complain, she was off there snogging Crumb, so I'm just, getting mine now. And it's just like Harry's like trying not to say anything in these conversations because he doesn't care.
I think it's really funny. It's one of those where like everything it's like trying to clean up a mess with tissue paper, and it's just one wrong move and it's just going to all fall apart. And all he does is try so hard not to say or do anything at all. And it's just so high school. It's so high school. I don't even have a better way to describe it. It's just so high school.
Well, and it's interesting too because, he's hanging out with Ron and, Ron's in his own little world right now. And when he's hanging out with Hermione, it usually means they're hanging out in the library. And with Hermione, it's really interesting because she warns him that there are a bunch of girls she's overheard in the bathroom talking about how they're going to try and slip him a love potion so that he would go to the, Slughorn's party with them. And she's like, why don't you just ask somebody? And he's like, well, there isn't anybody I want to invite, even though in his brain he's like trying not to think of Ginny, which is super cute. But this leads Harry to be like, well, how are these girls getting love potions in the first place? And apparently Fred and George are just complete geniuses.
Yeah, I really, really love this part. Not just because I think it's cute that Hermione is sort of warning Harry, and that I like his reaction in a couple times in this section where he's like, well, this was like the first time where her crazy rule following self like failed him. And because, she doesn't confiscate these potions, but it's because they didn't have them on him, and, she's being pragmatic. And, but we do get this nice call out again, to the Weasley brothers about how just kind of brilliant they really are. And that the fact of the matter is, like, they have done a really nice job of disguising their potions and making them look like things that you would normally get through the mail, like perfumes and cough syrup. And so, we kind of learn a little bit about how the protections on the castle work, and it's a little bit of an insult to Filch at this point too, but it is such a really interesting chapter, and it shows that Hermione kind of has like an admiration for the Weasley twins that she really couldn't have admitted when they were all at school together.
Yeah, and this is interesting too because this brings Harry into thinking this, like, okay, so if you can get things past the censors, basically, by putting it in something else, couldn't the necklace that came, make it through the security censors as well? And, like, he's trying to basically put two and two together with Malfoy getting the necklace, and then, Hermione makes a great point. Like, this is such powerful magic. I mean, love potions are somewhat innocuous, and I love that Harry kind of like brings back Slughorn's talk about how dangerous they can be, and of course thinking back to the conversations he's had with Dumbledore about the possibility that Voldemort's mother putting Tom Riddle under a love potion as well. And so like Harry kind of knows the dark side of love potions and how dangerous they can be, so I thought that was really interesting. Harry's like, yeah, easy for you to say, thinking about how, somebody wants to give him a love potion, which would cause him to basically lose his mind for this person. And I love in this moment that Madame Prince, the librarian, comes by and she sees the potions book that Harry has from the Half-Blood Prince, and she just starts yelling about it, how it's like despoiled and disgraced and befuddled, and like how badly he's treated it. And they're like, we're going, and they have this little moment, Hermione and him, about like, good night, she's going crazy. And Hermione's like, do you think maybe she heard you say something about Filch? And he's like, she goes, because I've always just suspected there might be something between them. And I was like, I just love these tiny little moments where Rowling just, like, if there's anything that doesn't necessarily really matter in the stories, it's these little moments, but it also makes it feel so real. Like that the kids would kind of pick up these things between teachers and whatnot. And it's a funny thing to think that Filch would be attractive to anybody, honestly.
Especially the way that he's depicted in the movies, right? Like he's depicted in the books as a fairly like unpleasant person, but definitely in the movies is like a very not attractive person.
Well, and as they're traveling back to their common room, he runs into Romilda Vale, who tries to offer him gilly water and then tries to offer him chocolate cauldrons that have fire whiskey in them, and she makes Harry take them because she says she doesn't really like them, and like Harry and Hermione are just giving each other the look like, ooh, this is not good, this is not good. And I think, in some ways, like it's really good that Hermione has given him this warning now, because then Harry isn't going to eat these. And, Harry ends up going to bed and still trying to figure out who in the world he's supposed to take to this stupid party he has to go to.
I do love that. I do love that this idea of like he can't seem to pick a date, almost because he doesn't really want to go to this party. But, he goes, so.
Well, and this is the part that I love is who he decides to go with, which is so cute.
Which comes up a little bit later here after we sort of have a clash between Ron and Hermione while they're in Transfiguration class.
Which is another one of those moments where their frustration with each other is bubbling over and everybody's getting a picture of it. And so as they're leaving Transfiguration, she just kind of hurries out, Hermione does, and Harry runs into Luna because Hermione is in the bathroom and she is crying, which brings back memories from that very first book where Ron made her cry, go to the bathroom. Which is funny. And Luna's like, I thought it was Moaning Merle at first, but it's Hermione. And she said something about Ron Weasley. And Harry's like, yeah, they got into a fight. And I love Luna's moment here because she's like, he says some funny things sometimes, but he can be unkind.
Love that assessment of him because it's pretty accurate. But it's really interesting because it's hard to think about a character that we all love so much as kind of being unkind, especially knowing what we know about him and how he's actually quite a good person. There's a lot there she sums it up so succinctly, and it's just like, yeah, but he's not very kind. And you're like, oh, mm-hmm. he's not being very kind right now.
I think Ron and his personality is one that obviously has been formed by having that many brothers and only having one sister. And part of that, too, has been in his life of always having to fight for respect and mm-hmm. any kind of, like, I think even attention, really. And so that has kind of created somebody in him that is insecure about who he is, and that he kind of takes that out on people sometimes in the most unkind ways. And he's definitely done that with Hermione here. And we saw it earlier in the series where it came out against Harry when he was jealous of Harry, and the money that Harry has, and the fact that Harry's the popular one. And he, so what's interesting is in each of these places is we see Ron kind of going through a refinement throughout these books. And this is definitely part of that process for him of having this relationship and having this frustration of not knowing how to be the man enough to have just the conversation with Hermione.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, I'm not excusing his behavior at all, but I do think it's really interesting is that Rowling is very good about giving us the understanding of who these characters are so that we can see why they're doing the things, but it's not an excuse as to why they do the things. We just have an ability to be like, okay, this is why this character does thus and so.
I agree. I think that's a good way to describe it.
I just kind of love that Harry's like, Luna, would you like to go to this Slughorn's party together? I mean, just as friends. If you don't want to. And she's like, no, I'd love to go as friends. And like, I just think it's so cute. And then I love the little moment. She's like, should I dye one of my eyebrows? Or should I do mine too? He's like, no. I'll get Hermione to fix it. And that's, from them trying to do human transfiguration in the transfiguration class. He has like a yellow eyebrow, which is really funny. He's like, no, I'll get Hermione to fix it. It's fine. Because knowing Luna, she would come showing up with 2 different eyebrow colors. But I think it's really cute that, he would ask her. And it is one of those moments where, like, you have this friendship between these 2 kind of unlikely characters, and it's kind of nice, like to truly kind of have this almost like brother-sister relationship between them. And I think in the movies they do a pretty good job of making them feel even closer. But this is another one of those places where we've truly had Harry, I guess, like grow. Like it's a growth moment too for that character, I think.
Well, and she talks about, they're kind of like, oh, how's your time been in school and all that. And we find that, Ginny has been really defending Luna still, which I think has been consistent since they've known each other in the books, that she's kind of always had Luna's back. And it happened again this year when people started calling her Loony, that, Ginny kind of laid into her, and, that comes back around when Ron finds out at the following meal that, Harry's invited Luna to the party, and he calls her Loony, and Ginny snaps at him and bites his head off too. And it just kind of reiterates that point she'd previously made about him not really being all that kind sometimes. And so I thought it was a little, a little convenient that he sort of displays the exact skills that she's speaking to, almost immediately upon being referred to. And, that Harry just doesn't really care, right? He doesn't really care what people think of her. He knows she's a little bit odd, but knows also deep down she's a good person and they have a lot in common. And I love the little friendship, and like you referred to, like the sibling relationship that's sort of growing there, because I think it benefits both of them.
Yes.
Especially as we see kind of immediately here at the party. There's a part where Harry mentions that bringing her with him to this party was worth just that moment that she has.
Yes.
And I do love that she's a little bit of a disruptor, and he likes that. So I think it's a really funny and a fun move that they make.
Yeah, no, there's that moment where they're at dinner and Ginny has just yelled at Ron, but then she turns to Harry and she's like, I'm so glad you're taking her. She's so excited. And I think, of course, Harry is super pleased with the fact that Ginny is pleased that he's taking Luna, even though that's kind of weird. But what I think that it does in that kind of like, we know Harry likes Ginny now, but Harry is continually showing Ginny his good character in these moves, and he's not even trying to, right? It's like, it's just there. Like, and I think one of the things
he's just being himself, and it's coming, it's just showing her who he is. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is really cute. I do love this little moment with Ron and Harry where he's like, can't you just apologize to Hermione? And he's like, why did you have to, initiate? And he's like, well, she laughed at my mustache that he had accidentally created in Transfiguration. Harry's like, I did too. It was the stupidest thing I've ever seen, which I just kind of love that moment.
It was this, because the way she describes it is this big, burly, bushy mustache that like you couldn't help but laugh at, right? While he's trying to change his eyebrows, he turns out to have this giant mustache. Like, it is funny.
And then what's really interesting here is that we have a conversation between Parvati and Harry and Hermione, and we find out that Hermione is actually going to take Cormac McLaggen to the party, which she definitely ends up regretting big time.
I do love, though, that whole scene is described in this really interesting sort of girl fight way. It's not so the catty traditional getting back, but they're like, he knows that they're like extra cheery, like a fake level of cheery, and he goes through and she seems even more cheery and she seems cheery, and then it ends with like, I'll never understand girls. Like,
yes, which is hysterical.
I thought it was really cute and a little bit of a spin on what you normally see as it's a spin on a trope that we normally see about girl fights. So I thought it was a nice little moment, and it's one of the few times we also see Hermione sort of conforming to a normal female teenager like emotion. She doesn't often do that kind of thing. And so, and then as you say, she mentions that she invited McCormack or McLaggen to the party.
Yes. Which, just seems like, again, it just seems like a bad idea. I love when we get to this party and there are all these famous people there. Apparently there's a vampire there. There's a famous author who does biographies and autobiographies, does biographies of people. And he's written this biography of this vampire named Sanguini, who's also there. And, Slughorn's really excited about this idea of, possibly Harry having his biography done by this person. And, I just seems super. I feel so bad for Harry in this whole thing. It's just so awkward because, obviously Slughorn is using him as a prop, and Harry hates that. And so it makes for a really uncomfortable moment. And, who invites a vampire to a, party with a bunch of high school kids? I just seems strange to me.
I find it really interesting, too, that we mentioned this because not too long ago, maybe a week or two ago, I was reading an article somewhere. I wish I'd kept track of it, but about some of the things that Rowling opted not to do in the Harry Potter series. And one of the things she specifically called out is she opted not to really go down the vampire path because it was so overdone and already well established in so much lore that she didn't feel like she had anything to add to it or anything to make it unique. And she didn't want to just fall into that pit of things that have already been done before. And so I had completely forgotten that there was even any mention of vampires in her books until I was reading this chapter again. And then I was like, oh yeah, that does happen. And I do love that Luna calls out one of her father's articles about Rufus Scrimmager being a vampire. And Harry's like, no, there's no way.
Yeah, that was really, really funny. It's interesting, too, because this party's not really going well for Hermione, because, she shows up a little bit later, and she looks so disheveled, it says that it looks like she just got through a thicket of Devil's Snare, and apparently she just escaped from Cormac, and, she's like, Cormac makes Squarp look like a gentleman. This is awful. And Hermione mentions another person she thought about inviting, which was Zacharias Smith. It's like, wow, she is trying really hard to piss Ron off, but it's not doing Hermione herself any favors having done this.
Yeah, she's trying as hard as she can. And this is actually a part where the book kind of differs from the movies, because in the movies, Harry mentioned something about like, oh, Hermione, I thought you and I could go together and then we wouldn't be saddled with awkward, weird dates. And in the movie, she's like, oh my gosh, that's a great idea. And that never happens in the books at all.
Well, and then I think Hermione gets a little bit mad at Harry because they start kind of like going back and forth about things. And Harry's like, you're not going to tell Ron what happened at Quidditch practice, are you? Like when, she confronted McLaggen. And she's like, why? Why would it matter? Harry's like, oh, of course I'm not going to tell Ron anything. And he's like, well, good, because I can't have Ron falling to pieces again at our next match. And I love that Hermione's just fed up. She's like, Quidditch, is that all boys care about? And I just think it's so cute because, like, you know, like, Harry's not doing anything wrong. He is genuinely worried about his friend, but he's the captain of this team, and he's also worried about his team falling apart because his keeper sucks, because he's got a broken heart again.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, like, their feud starts to spiral a little out of control here. But they run into Trelawney, too, while all this is happening. And she's talking to Luna and like, oh, I miss you in my class. Did you stop taking divination? And she's like, no, I have friends. And then we get a little glimpse back into more of a cultural stigma where even someone like Trelawney, who's involved in the divination arts, sort of is talking down about Ferenz and calling him I think she calls him a horse. And it makes Harry mad.
That was really interesting, and part of this too is we can tell that Trelawney is a little bit tipsy. She's had a little bit too much to drink.
She's had a little bit of the
She's had a little bit of the sauce, the cooking sherry,
Yep.
And so, but yeah, it's luckily we're able to kind of like move out of that because Slughorn kind of steps in and he starts talking about how good Harry is at potions, and then he brings Severus over to tell him about how good Harry is at potions, and Severus is like, I don't think I taught him anything in 5 years. And Slughorn's like, really? I mean, he's a natural, he's brilliant. And Severus is just like,
Well, he mentioned something about Harry concocting the original spell at the very beginning here, the Draught of Living Death, and how he did it so well that the only person who maybe rivals him is Snape himself, and how he may have even outdone him, who's this great potions master. And Snape has a weird reaction to it. He's not like flattered or even angry. He's kind of like, has this sort of like pondering reaction to it, like, oh, really? But it's sort of all quickly derailed when Filch shows up.
Well, and right before that moment, we have your favorite moment with Luna where Severus is talking about, you know, all the subjects that Harry's taking and how, oh, that, you know, I see you're, you know, shooting to be an Auror. And she butts in so funnily. She's like, oh, Harry, I don't think you should be an Auror. They're part of the Rotfang conspiracy, and everybody knows that. They're working from inside the Ministry of Magic to bring it down with a combination of dark magic and gum disease.
It's the gum disease that gets me. It's not the fact that the Aurors are working to take down the Ministry. It's that it's a combination of dark magic and gum disease.
It'll get you every time, people.
It's like whenever she has Luna, she creates a Mad Lib and like starts a coherent sentence and then just has an bodily function or something like that.
That's a great way to put it.
It's just like they throw something in there and you're just like, what?
Yeah, that's pretty perfect, actually. And that is the moment when Filch comes in, and we get Malfoy, who's been apparently skulking around these corridors, and he gets in trouble with Filch, and Filch is, of course, wanting severe punishment to happen here. But Slughorn's in a pretty forgiving mood at this point. He's like, you know, it's the holidays, it's no big deal. And Snape steps in and says, I'll take care of this. And he brings Malfoy out into the corridor, and Harry follows them with his invisibility cloak. And he catches this conversation with Snape and with Malfoy. And apparently Draco is up to something, but will not tell Snape what it is. Not only that, but we learn here that Draco's also been practicing occlumency because Snape can't read his mind with his Legilimens powers. And
you say those so well, Matt.
Sometimes.
So well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And so what we get here is these two going back and forth about how Draco obviously has some kind of mission and how dangerous it is and how Snape wants to help him. And, Draco wants nothing to do with Snape helping him. Obviously it's crucial that whatever this is, go forward. And he doesn't care. Malfoy wants nothing to do with Snape helping him because he's like, oh, you want to steal my glory. And Snape's like, you're just speaking like a child. And I quite understand that your father's capture and imprisonment hasn't upset you. And by that point, Draco's had enough and he's just walking away. And yeah, so we get this really interesting, this is the crux of this chapter, what the heck is going on with Malfoy and what the heck is going on with Snape, and is this connected to everything that Harry thinks is going on already with Malfoy?
Well, it sort of confirms a lot of that, right? Because they mentioned Katie Bell, and they mention, he mentions he had nothing to do with it because he wouldn't be that stupid, because he's got bigger plans in play and things like that. And, Snape calls out the fact that Harry's already sort of pointed fingers at Malfoy because he called him out that one time, but without naming Harry. But it's such a more heated, and it really is a different side of Draco than we see in the movie. Because in the movie, Draco's kind of afraid, and it really looks like Snape is calling the shots. And here, it definitely looks like they're kind of on the same path, but not together, right? Clearly they're not working together. At least Malfoy's not working with Snape. And Snape is trying to assist him. So it's just it paints an even worse picture than in the movie. And it is really kind of terrifying because you don't know what they're talking about or what's going to happen. And when you have, it's kind of like the opposite of Hermione and Ron arguing. You now have Snape and Malfoy arguing in a similar sort of anger, and this relationship is dissolving quickly and is also going to just blow up in their faces. So now Harry's got both the bad guys about to blow up in his face and his best friend's about to blow in his face. And it's kind of this almost, while kind of affirming what he already knows, it doesn't really make anything better. It makes things worse.
Yeah, and I think, this is the thing that's really so interesting about all this, is that it does seem at this moment like this will confirm all of Harry's worst thoughts, about what has been happening so far this year.
And about Snape in general, right? Because he says, I've been acting. Do you think I would have gotten as far as I would have if I hadn't been a great actor, and if I hadn't been patient and asked for help and bid my time and put my ego aside and all that, And it's basically if you're reading it from Harry's perspective and from the perspective of everything we know, it almost sounds like Snape has been lying to Dumbledore this whole time, just like the first chapter of this book or the second chapter of this book sort of tells us is happening. So it's just confirmation to our main character that, that's happening.
Well, and this is the thing, this chapter ends, and so it'll be fascinating to see where we go from here, and, what Harry's friends think of what he's heard. And I'm really interested to see what Harry does with this information, right? Because he's always kind of told, he's getting this whole boy who cried wolf, sort of branding with McGonagall and a little bit with Dumbledore and with his friends, right? So I'll be interested to see if he takes this with a little more caution or if he starts crying wolf without really understanding the whole picture, because I think it's going to go one of two ways. So it'll be really interesting to see how it pans out, and to see how this, because we end and Harry's sort of frozen in fear of what he just learned, and that's where we leave off. So it'll be really fascinating to see what happens from here, because we've we've moved away from the movie a little bit, and I think we're going to have a slightly different way that some of this plays out. So it's going to be really interesting. Well, we'll definitely have a different way that this plays out, because the Christmas holidays are completely different than they are in the movie. There isn't some stupid attack that happens. There's actually a lot of information that flows, and there's something even more important that happens in the story that does not really happen.
Don't spoil it.
Yeah, so that's coming next week. Sorry, so you'll have to come back next week and talk about that with us then. But Drea, before we get there, if anybody wants to talk to you and see what's going on with you, and now that you have your voice back, where can people find you?
Sure. Come complete some Luna Mad Libs with me on...
That would be awesome.
I feel like I got to do this now. On Twitter at PCFChick or on Instagram at Drea Coffman. It's Coffman.
Well, and you could find me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero under the name MattRushing02. I'm here on the network doing Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills as we talk about Star Wars each and every week on that show. And then you can find me over on the Trek FM network. I do 2 shows there. One's called The Orb. When Chris Jones and I get a chance, we talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And then you can find me doing our General Geek Show, which is the 602 Club. We talk about all of the fandoms we love, so that's a really fun. And then last but not least, I do a show called Cinema Stories with my friend Courtney, and that is where we talk about films through the lens of faith. But thank you so much for checking your Outpost.
Mischief managed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.